The coffee was bitter, the kind that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since 400, but Commander Jakob Reeve drank it anyway. He sat in the corner of the Barracks Café at Ramstein Air Base, Germany, dressed in a borrowed mechanic's coverall with oil stains he'd applied himself. No rank, no insignia, just another tired face in a sea of airmen grabbing breakfast before the day's chaos began. This was the third week of his undercover evaluation, a program designed by Pentagon brass to assess morale, leadership gaps, and the raw truth that never made it into official reports. He'd sat through complaints about supply chains, jokes about officers who couldn't tell a wrench from a ratchet, and endless speculation about the upcoming red flag exercises. Nothing unusual, nothing that warranted the classified briefing he'd endured before deploying to this role. But then the door swung open, letting in a gust of cold October wind, and she walked in. She was small, maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that looked like it had been tied in under 30 seconds. Her flight suit was faded in all the right places, the kind of wear that came from years in cockpits, not from looking tough. She moved through the room with the economy of someone who didn't waste steps, grabbed a cup of the same burnt coffee, and sat at a table near the window. Alone. Reeve had seen her file. Captain Myra Kovac, 31 years old. 8 years in service. Thunderbolt pilot, 3 deployments, commendations for close air support missions in contested airspace. But there was a note in her file, buried under the accolades, that made his jaw tighten. Recommended for promotion twice, passed over both times. No explanation, just the cold bureaucracy of a system that didn't always recognize its best. 2 younger pilots, fresh-faced lieutenants with patches so new they probably still smelled like the commissary, sat down at her table without asking. Reeve watched over the rim of his cup. One of them, a lanky kid with a Georgia drawl, leaned back in his chair like he owned the room. "So, Kovac, heard you're flying chase for the exercise tomorrow. That's cute. Babysitting the brass while the real pilots do the work." The other one snickered. Myra didn't look up from her coffee. She just stirred it slowly, the spoon clinking against the ceramic in a rhythm that felt deliberate. Then she spoke, her voice low and calm, with an accent that carried the weight of somewhere far from here. "Ghost, lead, pitbull, 3 words, that was all." The lieutenant stared at her, confused, but Reeve's hand froze halfway to his mouth, coffee forgot. His heart kicked against his ribs. He knew those words. Everyone in tactical aviation knew those words. They were call signs, not hers. They belonged to the dead. The cafe noise seemed to dull, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. Reeve set his cup down carefully, his mind racing through files, incident reports, after-action reviews. 3 call signs, 3 pilots, 1 mission that never made it into the public record. A mission in the mountains of northern Syria 18 months ago, where a joint task force had been pinned down by a mechanized column that appeared out of nowhere. Close air support had been called. 4 A-10s had responded. Only 1 made it back. The lieutenants were still staring at Myra, waiting for an explanation that she clearly wasn't going to give. The one with the drawl opened his mouth, probably to say something stupid, but Myra stood up, tossed her half-finished coffee into the trash, and walked out. The door swung shut behind her, and the cafe returned to its usual hum of conversation and clatter. Reeve sat very still, his mind replaying those 3 words. Ghost, lead, pitbull. They weren't just call signs. They were names etched on a memorial wall in Bagram before the withdrawal. They were brothers and sisters in arms who hadn't come home, and Myra Kovac had just spoken them like a prayer. He pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll through messages, but his fingers moved across the encrypted app that connected him back to his oversight team. He typed quickly, "Need full mission file. Operation Dagger Ridge, Syria, 18 months ago. Captain Myra Kovac, sole survivor, priority 1. The reply came back in seconds. "File is sealed, above your clearance." Reeve frowned. He was a commander running an undercover evaluation with direct authorization from a 2-star general. What the hell was sealed above his clearance? He typed again, "Override request, authorization Reeve 7 Delta." A longer pause this time, then, "Request denied, do not pursue." Reeve stared at the screen. In 15 years of service, he'd never been told to stand down from a personnel review. Never. He pocketed the phone and looked toward the window where Myra had been sitting. The chair was still slightly askew, the table empty except for a faint ring of condensation from her cup. Outside, he could see her walking across the tarmac toward the flight line, hands in her pockets, head down against the wind. Alone. Always alone. The next morning, Reeves stood in the back of the briefing room as the red flag exercise commanders laid out the day's mission. The room was packed with pilots, navigators, ground controllers, and support staff, all seated in rows of uncomfortable plastic chairs. The air smelled like jet fuel and nervous energy. On the screen at the front, a map of the training range lit up with colored lines and target zones. Today's scenario, the lead instructor, a colonel with a voice like gravel, announced, is a high-threat environment. Surface-to-air missile sites, simulated air superiority fighters, and a convoy of enemy armor moving through a narrow valley. Your job is to neutralize the convoy without getting shot down. Rules of engagement are strict. You break them, you're out. The colonel clicked to the next slide and a roster of pilots appeared. Reeves scanned the names. There she was. Captain Myra Kovac. Call sign, Wraith. He blinked. Wraith. Not Ghost, not Lead, not Pitbull, her own call sign. He made a mental note. The colonel continued. Captain Kovac will be flying chase. Her role is observation and safety. She is not cleared to engage unless there's an emergency. A few pilots glanced back toward where Myra sat 3 rows from the back. She didn't react, just stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. The lanky lieutenant from the cafe leaned over to his buddy and whispered something. They both smirked. Reeve felt a flicker of anger, but he kept his face neutral. This was exactly why he was here, to see how the system really worked when no one thought they were being watched. The brief ended, and pilots filed out toward the flight line. Reeve followed at a distance, still in his mechanic's coverall, carrying a clipboard that made him look like he belonged. The morning sun was just starting to burn off the fog that clung to the runway. Warthogs sat in a neat row, their twin engines and nose-mounted GAU-8 cannons giving them the look of flying tanks. Ugly, brutal, and absolutely lethal. Myra walked toward her aircraft, number 23 with the call sign Wraith stenciled below the canopy. She did her walk around with the precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Checked the control surfaces, the landing gear, the munitions hard points. A crew chief approached her with a clipboard and they exchanged a few words. Reeve couldn't hear them, but he saw the crew chief smile, a genuine one, the kind that said respect. That told him something. The enlisted crews always knew who the real pilots were. They didn't care about politics or promotion boards. They cared about who brought their jet back in one piece and who didn't waste their time with bullshit. Myra climbed into the cockpit and the crew chief helped her strap in. Reeve watched as she ran through her pre-flight checks, her hands moving over switches and dials with practiced efficiency. Then the engine started. The low whine built into a roar and the tarmac vibrated under his boots. One by one, the other A-10s fired up. The sound was overwhelming, a symphony of raw power that made conversation impossible. Reeve moved closer to the tower where he could listen in on the radio traffic. He pulled out a small receiver, tuned to the exercise frequency, and slipped in an earpiece. Static crackled, then voices. Tower, Viper 1-1 ready for taxi. Viper 1-1 cleared to taxi runway 27, winds 270 at 8 knots. Viper 1-1 copy. More call signs followed. Viper 1-2, Viper 1-3. Then quieter, almost hesitant. Tower, Wraith ready for taxi. Wraith cleared to taxi, your tail end Charlie, stay clear of the exercise box unless directed. Wraith copies. Her voice was calm, professional, but Reeve heard something underneath it. Not fear, not hesitation, just a weariness that came from being sidelined too many times. The A-10s rolled down the taxiway in formation, their wings loaded with training munitions and sensor pods. Reeve watched them take off, one after another, the roar of engines fatting as they climbed into the pale morning sky. Myra's jet was last. She lifted off smoothly, gear retracting, wings dipping slightly as she banked to follow the others. Then she was gone, just a dark silhouette against the clouds. Reeve stood on the tarmac for a long moment, the wind tugging at his coverall. He thought about those 3 words again: ghost, lead, pitbull, and he wondered what the hell had happened in the mountains of Syria. Inside the exercise box, 20,000 feet above the Nevada Desert Training Range, the mission was already going sideways. Viper 1-1, the flight leader, had misjudged the approach to the valley, and now his 4-ship formation was bunched up, too close together, too predictable. Reeve listened to the radio chatter from the tower observation deck, his borrowed mechanic persona forgotten as he focused on the voices crackling through his earpiece. Viper 1-1, Hawkeye. Advise you have simulated Sam Locke. Bearing 285. Copy, Hawkeye. Viper flight brake left dispense chaff. The A-10s scattered, but the damage was done. In a real scenario, at least 2 of them would be smoking holes in the ground. The exercise controller's voice cut in cold and clinical. Viper 1-2, you are splash, egress the box. Viper 1-3, you are splash, egress the box. Groans and curses filled the frequency. 2 jets down in the first 5 minutes. Reeve shook his head. This was what happened when competence took a backseat to ego. The remaining 2 Vipers pressed on, but they were rattled now, their communication sloppy. Viper 1-1, Hawkeye. Convoy is entering the valley. Time on target 2 minutes. Copy. Viper 1-4, line up for gun run. 1-4's in. Reeve watched the tracker screen where simulated positions showed the jets diving toward the convoy, but they were too high, too fast. The training system beeped. Missed. Both of them. Got 'em it, someone muttered in the tower, the exercise controller sighed. Viper 1-1, you are Winchester training munitions. Egress and rearm or call index. Index, end of exercise, a polite way of saying they'd failed. Viper 1-1's voice came back tight with frustration. Hawkeye, Viper 1-1, we still have the convoy. Request Wraith be cleared hot. A pause. Reeve leaned forward, his pulse quickening. The controller's voice returned, skeptical. Viper 1-1, confirm. You want the chase pilot to engage. Affirmative, she's got a full load, let her take the run. Another pause, longer this time. Reeve could almost hear the debate happening in the control room. Finally, Wraith, Hawkeye, you are cleared hot. Repeat, cleared hot. Convoy bearing 115, range 6 miles, moving north through the valley. Single pass, do not re-engage. For the first time all day, Myra's voice came through clear and strong. Wraith copies, cleared hot, single pass. Reeve's hand tightened on the railing. He could see the tracker now, Wraith's icon breaking off from her observation orbit and diving toward the valley. Her altitude dropped fast, 8,000 feet, 6,000, 4,000. She was coming in low the way A-10 pilots were trained to do, hugging the terrain to avoid radar and missiles. Wraith, Hawkeye, convoy is 2 miles ahead. You have the target. Wraith has the target. Tally convoy, commencing run. What happened next would be replayed in debrief rooms for weeks. Myra rolled her A-10 into a 30-degree dive, the jet's nose pointed directly at the simulated enemy convoy crawling through the narrow valley below. Her airspeed climbed. 300 knots, 350. She didn't pull up, didn't hesitate. At 1,500 feet, still diving, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared to life. In training mode, it fired electronic pulses instead of 30mm rounds, but the sound was the same. A deep, guttural brrrrrt that rattled bones and made grown men flinch. The targeting system recorded every simulated hit. 12 vehicles, 12 kills, perfect accuracy. Then she pulled up hard, the G-forces slamming her back into the seat as the A-10 climbed away from the valley floor. Wraith off target, all vehicles destroyed. Her voice was steady, professional. Like she just finished a checklist item. The radio was silent for a beat. Then Viper 1-1 came back and Reeve could hear the disbelief in his voice. Hawkeye, Viper 1-1, confirm Wraith's target assessment. Viper 1-1, Hawkeye confirms, 12 vehicles destroyed, mission complete. More silence. Then quietly, almost grudgingly, Wraith, Viper 1-1, good shooting. Wraith copies. That was it, no gloating, no showboating, just the job done. Reeve pulled the earpiece out and stared at the tracker screen. Wraith's icon was already heading back toward base, her altitude steady, her course perfect. He felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just a competent pilot. This was someone who had been doing this long enough to make the impossible look routine. When the jets landed an hour later, Reeve was waiting near the hangar. The pilots climbed out of their cockpits, some of them still buzzing with adrenaline, others quiet and contemplative. Viper 11 avoided eye contact with everyone, his shoulders hunched as he walked past. Myra was the last to shut down her engines. She climbed out slowly, pulled off her helmet, and handed it to the crew chief who had been waiting. Her hair was matted with sweat, and there were red marks on her face from the oxygen mask. She looked exhausted. The crew chief said something and she smiled, a small, tired smile but genuine. Then she walked past the other pilots without a word and disappeared into the hangar. Reeve followed her. He found her in the locker room, sitting on a bench, unlacing her boots. She didn't look up when he approached. "Mechanics don't usually hang around the pilot locker rooms," she said, her accent turning the words into something almost musical. Reeve stopped, looked down at his coverall, then back at her. "You made me," he said. She glanced up and he saw her eyes for the first time. Dark brown, sharp, tired. "Day 3, she said. "You've been watching everyone, but you don't know how anything works. Real mechanics don't carry clean clipboards." Reeve smiled despite himself. He pulled a folding chair over and sat down across from her. "Commander Jakob Reeve, I'm running an undercover evaluation." Myra raised an eyebrow. "And you're blowing your cover because I need to know what happened on Dagger Ridge." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, something cold. "That's classified," she said. "Above my clearance, apparently," Reeve replied, "which makes me think it's worth knowing." Myra finished unlacing her boots and set them aside. She leaned back against the locker, her gaze fixed on some point past his shoulder. "Why do you care?" "Because I watched you get sidelined today. Watched them treat you like you were babysitting. And then I watched you do in 30 seconds what 4 other pilots couldn't do in 20 minutes. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because you've done it before, under pressure, when it mattered." She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke, her voice softer now. "Ghost, Lead, and Pitbull were my wingmen, my friends. We flew together for 2 years. Same squadron, same deployments. They died because I made a call and it was the wrong call. Or maybe it was the right call and the world just didn't care. Either way, they're gone and I'm still here." Reeve waited. Myra looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the weight she carried. "If you want the file, Commander, you'll have to go higher than me. I'm just the pilot who came back." That night Reeve sat in his temporary quarters, a small room with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the flight line. His laptop was open, the screen glowing in the darkness. He'd spent the last 3 hours sending encrypted requests, pulling every string he had, calling in favors from people who owed him. Finally, at 200, a file appeared in his inbox. "Operation Dagger Ridge. Classified." He opened it. The mission brief was sparse, written in the clipped language of military reports. A joint special operations task force had been moving through the mountains of northern Syria, tracking a high-value target. Intel suggested the target was lightly defended. The task force moved in. They were wrong. A mechanized column, dug in and waiting, opened fire. The task force was pinned down in a valley with no cover and no way out. Close air support was called. 4 A-10s responded. Call signs: Wraith, Ghost, Lead, Pitbull. Reeve scrolled down. The after-action review was clinical. Wraith had been flight leader. She'd assessed the situation and made the call to split the formation. 2 jets, Ghost and Lead, would suppress the anti-aircraft positions on the ridgeline. The other 2, Wraith and Pitbull, would take out the armor in the valley. It should have worked. But the enemy had a mobile SAM system that wasn't on the intel reports. Ghost was hit first. The missile struck his left engine and he went down hard, ejecting seconds before impact. Lead tried to cover him, circling back to provide suppression fire. The SAM sight locked onto him. He never had a chance. Pitbull saw it happen. The report noted that he broke formation, diving toward the SAM site in a desperate attempt to take it out before it could fire again. He succeeded. The site was destroyed. But the debris from his rocket strikes caused a catastrophic malfunction in his weapons system. His jet exploded mid-flight. No ejection. Wraith had been alone then. The task force was still pinned down. The armor column was still advancing. And she had one decision to make: abort and preserve her own life, or press the attack and hope she could finish the job before the remaining anti-aircraft fire took her out. She pressed. The report included her gun camera footage. Reeve watched it, his jaw tight. She'd gone low, so low that her belly was almost scraping the rocks, and she'd fired every round in her cannon. Every rocket, every missile. The armor column was obliterated. The task force survived. 0 casualties on the ground, 3 in the air. The report concluded with a single line. Captain Kovacs' actions directly resulted in the successful extraction of the task force. Recommend commendation for valor. Reeve sat back, his eyes burning. Recommend commendation for valor. But her file said she'd been passed over for promotion, twice. He scrolled to the final page. There was a note buried in the administrative section. Informal, handwritten, scanned into the file like an afterthought. Captain Kovacs declined interview with media. Declined public recognition. Stated she did not want to be celebrated while her wingmen were mourned. Request for public commendation withdrawn at her insistence. Reeve closed the laptop. He stared at the dark screen, his reflection staring back at him. She'd saved lives, lost friends, and then refused to let anyone call her a hero. Because in her mind, heroes didn't come home alone. The next morning, Reeve requested a meeting with the base commander, Brigadier General Dalton Pierce. Pierce was a career fighter pilot, the kind of officer who had flown combat missions in 3 different wars and still found time to run a tight base. His office was immaculate, with model jets on the shelves and commendations covering the walls. Reeve stood at attention as Pierce looked up from his desk. At ease, Commander. I hear you've been digging into personnel files that are above your clearance. With respect, sir, I'm conducting an evaluation. Captain Kovacs' file raised questions. Pierce leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Dagger Ridge. Yes, sir. You read the report. I did, sir. Pierce nodded slowly. Then you know why she's not on every recruitment poster in the Air Force. She doesn't want to be, and we respect that, but it's caused complications. Complications, sir. She's too good, Commander. Pilots like her make the rest of the force look bad. And when she refuses to play the game, refuse to climb the ladder, refuse to smile for the cameras, people in Washington get uncomfortable. They don't know what to do with someone who just wants to fly. Reeve felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice level. So they sideline her, make her fly chase, pass her over for promotion. Pierce's eyes hardened. I didn't say I agreed with it. I said it's complicated. You want to change the system, Commander? Good luck. But don't make her the martyr in your crusade. She's been through enough. Reeve left the office with more questions than answers. He walked across the base, past the hangars and the flight line until he found Myra sitting on the wing of her A-10, a clipboard in her lap, making notes. She looked up as he approached. Back again, Commander. I read the file, Reeve said. She didn't respond, just went back to her notes. You saved 32 lives that day, Reeve continued, and lost 3 friends, and then you told them not to make you a hero. Why? Myra set the clipboard down. Because heroes are for stories, I'm just a pilot. And those 32 people on the ground, they have families, they have lives. That's what mattered, not me. You don't think you deserve recognition. I think Ghost, Lead, and Pitbull deserve to come home. I think their families deserved better than a flag and a memorial service. I think, she trailed off, her voice tightening, I think the world doesn't need another story about the one who survived. Reeve climbed up onto the wing and sat down beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, what if I told you there are people in Washington who want to change things, who want to make sure pilots like you aren't sidelined anymore? Myra smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then I'd say they're a few years too late. She picked up her clipboard and stood. I have a flight in 30 minutes. You should go back to your evaluation, Commander. Find someone who actually wants your help. But Reeve didn't leave. Over the next week, he attended every briefing, every flight, every debrief. He watched Myra fly chase again and again, always professional, always precise, always alone. And he watched the other pilots begin to change. It started small. A nod of respect from Viper 1-4 as Myra walked past. A question from one of the younger lieutenants about her gun run technique. An invitation to sit with the squadron during a debrief. She declined most of them. But Reeve saw the shift, saw the way people started to look at her differently, not with pity, not with mockery, with respect. And then on the 8th day, something happened that no one expected. An emergency call came in. A civilian aircraft, a small Cessna, had gone down in the mountains 40 miles north of the base. 2 people on board, severe weather. Search and rescue was scrambled, but the helicopters couldn't fly in the conditions. The winds were too strong, the visibility too low. The base commander stood in the operations center, staring at the weather maps, his jaw tight. "We need eyes on that crash site, now." One of the operations officers spoke up. "Sir, the only thing that can fly in that weather is an A-10, but we'd need a pilot crazy enough to take the risk." Everyone in the room turned to look at Myra. She stood near the back, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Pierce looked at her. "Captain Kovac, can you do it?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." 20 minutes later, she was airborne. Reeve stood in the operations center, listening to the radio chatter, his heart pounding. The weather was brutal, winds gusting to 50 knots, clouds down to 1,000 feet. Myra's voice came through calm and steady. "Hawkeye, Wraith, I'm entering the search grid." The operations center was silent except for the hum of electronics and the occasional crackle of radio static. Everyone was listening. Reeve stood near the back, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the radar screen. Myra's icon moved slowly across the display, weaving through the mountains like a needle threading fabric. "Hawkeye, Wraith, visibility is near zero, switching to infrared." "Copy, Wraith, search and rescue is standing by." Minutes passed. Reeve could feel the tension in the room, the way everyone held their breath, waiting. Then, "Hawkeye, Wraith, I have a heat signature. Coordinates 37.42 north, 116.88 west. Appears to be a small fire, possibly from the crash. No movement visible." "Copy, Wraith, can you confirm survivors?" Another pause. Reeve imagined her up there, circling low, the A-10 shaking in the wind, her eyes scanning the ground through the targeting pod. "Hawkeye, Wraith, I have 2 individuals near the wreckage. Both appear to be moving. Recommend immediate extraction." The operations officer exhaled. "Wraith, Hawkeye, good work. RTB, and we'll get the rescue birds out there as soon as the weather clears." "Negative, Hawkeye. Weather is deteriorating. If we wait, they won't survive the night." Pierce stepped forward. "Wraith, this is Pierce. Explain." Myra's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. "Sir, temperature at the crash site is dropping fast. They're exposed. No shelter. If we don't extract them in the next 2 hours, they're gone. We can't fly the rescue birds in this weather." "No, sir, but I can mark the site, drop flares, guide them in manually if the clouds lift even a little." Pierce looked at the weather officer, who shook his head. "Sir, the forecast doesn't show improvement for at least 6 hours. "Then we're out of options," Pierce said, his voice heavy. Myra's response was immediate. "Sir, request permission to remain on station. I'll burn every drop of fuel I have. If the weather breaks, I'll be here to guide them in." Pierce hesitated. Reeve could see the calculation in his eyes. Keeping Myra in the air burned resources, risked her life, and might not even make a difference. But sending her home meant 2 people would die. "Permission granted," Pierce said finally. "But the second your fuel hits bingo, you RTB. That's an order." "Copy, sir." For the next hour, Myra circled the crash site. Reeve listened to her check in every 10 minutes, her voice steady, her professionalism unwavering. The weather didn't break. The clouds stayed low. The wind stayed strong. And her fuel gauge kept dropping. At the 90-minute mark, the operations officer spoke up. "Sir, Wraith is approaching bingo fuel." Pierce nodded. "Wraith, Hawkeye, your bingo in 10 minutes, time to come home." There was a pause, then "Hawkeye, Wraith, request 5 more minutes." "Negative, Wraith, RTB now." "Sir, the clouds are starting to lift. If I can just—" "Captain Kovac, that is an order. RTB immediately." Silence. Reeve held his breath. Then finally, "Wraith copies, RTB." Her icon turned toward the base, but as it did, another voice crackled over the radio. One of the rescue helicopter pilots. "Hawkeye, Rescue 1, we have a visual on the clouds. They're breaking up. Request permission to launch." Pierce's head snapped up. "Rescue 1, Hawkeye, confirm you can make the site." "Affirmative, sir. It's tight, but we can do it." Pierce looked at the weather officer, who nodded reluctantly. "Do it," Pierce said. 20 minutes later, the rescue helicopter reached the crash site. Myra had stayed just long enough to mark it with flares, then turned for home, her fuel gauge hovering just above empty. The 2 survivors were pulled from the wreckage, hypothermic but alive. When Myra landed, the fuel truck was already waiting. Reeve watched as she climbed out of the cockpit, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The crew chief met her with a grin. "Hell of a flight, Captain." She nodded but didn't say anything, just walked toward the hangar, her helmet tucked under her arm. Reeve intercepted her before she reached the door. "You almost ran out of fuel," he said. "Almost," she agreed. "That was reckless." She stopped and looked at him. "That was the job, Commander. The job was to mark the site, not to stay until you were flying on fumes." "The job," Myra said quietly, "was to bring those people home, and I did." She walked past him into the hangar, leaving Reeve standing in the cold. He realized then that he'd been wrong. This wasn't about recognition or promotions or politics. This was about something deeper, something that couldn't be measured in medals or ranks. Myra Kavach flew because it was who she was, and nothing, not the bureaucracy, not the loss, not the loneliness, would ever change that. The next morning, the story of the rescue spread across the base. By noon, it had reached the Pentagon. By evening, a call came in from Washington. Reeve was summoned to Pierce's office. When he arrived, the general was on the phone, his expression grim. He hung up and gestured for Reeve to sit. "That was the chief of staff," Pierce said. "They want Captain Kavach in D.C., press conference, medal ceremony, the whole dog and pony show." Reeve felt his stomach sink. "Does she know?" "Not yet, and she's going to hate it." Pierce leaned back in his chair. "But here's the thing, Commander, this isn't about her anymore. This is about the Air Force. We need good stories right now, heroes, someone the public can rally behind." "She's not a prop, sir." "I know that, but orders are orders. She'll go to D.C., she'll smile for the cameras, and then she'll come back here and keep flying. That's how this works." Reeve stood. "With respect, sir, that's not how it should work." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "You're dismissed, Commander." Reeve left the office, his mind racing. He found Myra in the hangar, working on her jet with the crew chief. She looked up as he approached, and something in his expression made her set down her wrench. "They're sending you to Washington," Reeve said without preamble. Myra's face went still. "When?" "2 days." She didn't respond, just stared at him, her jaw tight. "You can refuse," Reeve said. "They can't make you go." "Yes, they can," Myra said quietly. "And if I refuse, it'll just make things worse. They'll say I'm difficult, uncooperative, and the next time someone needs a scapegoat, it'll be me." Reeve wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. The system didn't reward people like her. It used them. "I'm sorry," he said. Myra picked up her wrench. "Don't be. I've been through worse." But as she turned back to her jet, Reeve saw the slump in her shoulders, the exhaustion in her movements. And he made a decision. He couldn't change the system, but he could make sure her story was told the right way. The press conference in Washington was everything Myra hated. Bright lights, reporters shouting questions, a podium with the Air Force seal, and a row of generals standing behind her like props. She wore her dress uniform, the blue fabric crisp and uncomfortable, her ribbons and medals arranged in perfect rows. The silver star they just pinned on her chest felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The chief of staff stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Captain Myra Kavach, one of the finest pilots in the United States Air Force. Her actions over the past 18 months, culminating in the recent rescue operation in Nevada, exemplify the courage and dedication that define our service." Myra stood beside him, her hands clasped behind her back, her face a careful mask of neutrality. The speech continued. Valor, sacrifice, heroism. Words that felt hollow when she thought about Ghost, Lead, and Pitbull. When the chief of staff finished, he gestured for Myra to step up to the microphone. She hadn't prepared a speech. Hadn't wanted to, but the cameras were rolling and there was no escape. She cleared her throat. "Thank you, sir, and thank you to everyone here, but I need to be clear about something. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it was my job. Because there were people who needed help and I was in a position to provide it. That's what we do, all of us, every day." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "This medal doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every pilot, every crew chief, every controller who does their job without expecting applause. It belongs to Ghost, Lead, and Pitbull, who gave everything so that others could live. I'm just the one who came home, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worth that." The room was silent. Then slowly someone started clapping, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. Myra stepped back from the microphone, her face flushed, and walked off the stage. Reeve was waiting for her in the hallway. "That was a hell of a speech," he said. She didn't look at him. "Can we leave now?" "Yeah, we can leave." They walked out of the Pentagon together into the cold January air. Myra stopped on the steps, looking up at the overcast sky. "I hate this," she said quietly. "I know. I just want to fly." "I know." She glanced at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something that might have been gratitude. "Thanks for being here, Commander," Reeve nodded. "Any time." They stood there for a moment, two people who understood that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought in the sky. They were fought in rooms with bright lights and microphones, where the enemy was bureaucracy and the weapons were words. But the war was worth fighting. Because people like Myra deserved better. And maybe, just maybe, the system could change. One story at a time. Back at Ramstein, life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. Myra flew her missions, trained the younger pilots, and kept her head down, but something had shifted. The other pilots treated her differently now. Not with awe, not with pity, with respect. She was invited to debriefs, asked for advice, included in the jokes and the camaraderie that she'd always kept at arm's length. And slowly, carefully, she let them in. 6 months later, Reeve received a message. It was short, just a few lines, but it made him smile. "Commander, thought you want to know, got the promotion. Squadron leader now. Still hate politics, but at least I can make sure the next generation doesn't get sidelined. Thanks for giving a damn. Kovac," he replied immediately. "Congratulations, Major, you earned it, Reeve." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. The system was slow to change, but it did change. One person at a time, one story at a time, and sometimes that was enough. Years later, when new pilots arrived at Ramstein, they would hear the stories. About the pilot who flew through a storm to save 2 lives, about the mission in Syria that no one talked about but everyone knew, about the woman who refused to be a hero but became one anyway. They would see her name on the squadron's wall of honor, Wraith, Major Myra Kovac, and they would learn what it meant to be a pilot, not the glory. Not the medals, but the job, the mission, the responsibility to bring everyone home, because that was what mattered. And in a world that often forgot, there were still people like Myra who remembered, who carried the weight, who flew into the storm because someone had to. And when the young pilots asked her about it, about the missions and the medals and the legacy, she would smile that small, tired smile and say, "It's just the job. Now get back to work." Because for Myra Kovac, it had never been about being remembered. It was about making sure no one was forgotten.